The joy of writing. Narratives. First, let's talk about what narratives are. Narratives are the easiest form of writing for most people because they tell a story using chronology. That's a big word that means events in order. Narratives can be happy, sad, inspiring. They use first person. For those of you who are not familiar with the pronouns first, second, and third, this means you can use the pronoun I. They have a beginning, a middle, and an ending, like all stories do, and they use something called figurative language to engage or entertain the reader and make the narrative seem more realistic. We'll look at some examples next. Before you start writing, you should always plan your narrative. It only takes a few minutes to plan out the narrative, and it makes it a whole lot easier to write. First of all, think of an interesting story from your life. It doesn't have to be a happy story, it can be a sad story, or it can be an embarrassing moment, which we've all had. Make a timeline of events. Then, use circles or squares or some sort of notation to organize the events into beginning, middle, and ending. Then you should add some transition words to move the narrative through time and let the reader know when things happen. These are words like first, next, and then. Sometimes we use transitions to add emphasis. These are words like however, therefore, moreover. Then you should add some figurative language to make the narrative entertaining, engaging, or more realistic. Here are some examples. Similes. These are comparisons with the words like or as, such as, I look just like a clown. Onomatopoeia are sound words, words like pow, bam, pop. Foreshadowing is a great tool to use in writing. This is a statement that clues the reader to what happens later. For instance, I knew something bad was about to happen would foreshadow to the reader that later on you're going to tell them about the bad thing that happened. Alliteration. These are 2 or 3 words with the same initial sound like pity the poor penny. In that statement, the repeated sound is the P. Hyperbole. We use exaggeration all the time when we talk to our friends. You should also put it in your writing to make it more entertaining. The sentence, he screamed like a wild hyena, is an example of exaggeration. It is also a simile. And dialect. These are words spelled as they are spoken. In this sentence, I felt as if I was in danger. I spelled the word just as it would have been spoken by someone with a southern accent. For those of you who don't live in the South, danger, D-A-N-G-E-R, is the very last word in that sentence. You can also add dialogue or quotes of people involved in the narrative. This makes the narrative seem more realistic to the reader. After you've done all of those things, which should take you a good bit of time, you should brainstorm a way to start your essay with a common saying, a question, a strong description, or even a statistic. Then, brainstorm a way to end your essay by either stating the lesson learned or the meaning that you get from that experience in your life. Once you've planned out your narrative, it is now time to put it all together. Let's talk about structure. Every narrative should start with an introduction. That is a statement that hooks the reader. This can be a quote, a statistic, a question, or even a powerful description that takes the reader to the place you're going to tell them about or gets them right into the story. The last sentence of your introduction should state what the essay is about. It might give a preview to what the essay is about, and we call this your thesis. In the body of your essay, which might include several paragraphs, you'll tell your story, the beginning, the middle, and the ending, using transitions, like first, next, then, and finally. You should then be sure that you have that figurative language in those body paragraphs to interest the reader. And finally, in your conclusion, restate your thesis in some way, bring the reader all the way back to the beginning, and then tell the lesson or meaning. Once you have a good understanding of your essay structure, it is now time to write. When you get done writing your essay, we're going to edit your essay with the top 5. These are the most common errors that we find in essays. Let's go through them briefly. Introductory word or phrase, comma. When you write phrases at the beginning of your sentences that start with adverbs or sometimes prepositional phrases, be sure you put commas at the end of the phrase. Like, at the beginning of the story, comma. You should always look for those commas. A lot of us leave them off. Also, make sure you have commas after your transition words like finally, in conclusion, and then. Compound sentence comma is sometimes one of those that's left off. He was once my friend, comma, but now I can never trust him again. Notice that this statement contains two complete thoughts. You look for the coordinating conjunction, but sometimes it's and, for, yet, or so. Be sure you have a comma before that coordinating conjunction. Interrupter comma. This one is less forgotten because a lot of us don't use this type of phrase in sentences. Mr. Jones, comma, my friend, comma, spoke at the assembly. Sometimes we have phrases in the middle of a sentence that give us more information, they explain, or they tell who someone is. Be sure you put commas around those phrases before and after them. Sentencing. This is one of the most common errors. A lot of us forget to put subjects in our sentences. Sometimes we have a little trouble with fragments and run-ons. A simple sentence expresses one complete thought. A compound sentence expresses two thoughts. But be careful of run-on sentences which contain too many thoughts. We call these run-ons. This means you have more than two thoughts in a sentence. You need to separate these sentences with commas or into two or maybe sometimes three complete sentences. Be sure you look for that. A fragment usually is missing a subject, so make sure you have a subject in every one of your sentences and a verb and a complete thought. Check your spelling and your verb tense. Your verbs must agree with your subjects in number, and don't change verb tense in your essay unless you make a big flashback. This is where you start in the present, and then you flash back to the past, you tell me a story, and then you come back to the present. Now we're going to look at a sample narrative. This is a true story from my own tragic youth. Transitions have been bolded so that you can see them, and figurative language is underlined. Enjoy this narrative and have a laugh on me. The title of my narrative, and you should always be sure you put a title in your narratives, is The Virgin Mary Falls from Grace. I hook my reader by using a quote from a very famous Christmas carol that most of us know. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Just about every person in the world knows this popular Christmas tune. Upon hearing it, one has the vision of a nativity scene where Mary and Joseph kneel before the newborn baby Jesus. However, hearing the song conjures up a much different memory for me, one filled with pain and embarrassment. The last two statements actually are my thesis. It tells the reader that there is a memory or an event, past event I'm going to tell you about, and that it is filled with pain and embarrassment. Sometimes your thesis is more than one sentence. In this case, that is what is going on. When I was in the 7th grade, I was involved in my church's film production of The Christmas Story. The youth director had this idea to produce a film version of the Nativity and show it to the church as we sang Christmas hymns. So, one cold, rainy day in December, we all met at the church. This is the beginning of my story. It sets the scene, lets the reader know the setting. There are also transitions used to let the reader know when events happened. At the beginning, you should be sure that you set the scene for the reader and let them know time and place. Getting up in the morning was painful enough, yet little did I know what was coming later that day. The weather was cold and the skies were dark and gray. However, I did my best to grin and bear it, just like everyone else. Like clowns piling in the clown car at the circus, we all loaded up to travel to our makeshift film set. It was at a farm in northern Lincoln County. We drove for what seemed like hours over hills and dales, until finally the car lurched to a stop As I looked around, I said to myself, "This place looks like a real fixer-upper." There was mud everywhere. The barn and other buildings were literally falling down, and an old rickety fence that scaled beside the barn looked like it could hardly hold in the animals. I began to start the middle part of my story in this paragraph, and I used several examples of figurative language. The first one is foreshadowing, to let the reader know that something is coming later in the story that is not positive. I use a common expression, a simile, some exaggeration, dialogue, and another simile to entertain the reader and to engage him or her in my story and help paint pictures. Despite the dilapidated condition of the farm, we all got ready to roll tape. I was dressed up as Mary in a long sheet with a scarf for a veil, which proved uncomfortable and cumbersome. I constantly stumbled over the sheet just trying to walk. My role was to ride the donkey to the pretend manger, get off the donkey, and then kneel by the crib with the fake baby Jesus. I knew all this beforehand, but once I saw the donkey I was to ride, I began to have misgivings about my task. It was a huge, imposing animal that looked like it had better things to do than be led around by a bunch of city-fied yokels trying to make a Christmas play. This also is the middle of my story. I have some transitions to start off. I also use a common expression and a simile to engage the reader. Regardless of my hesitation, the director told me to go ahead and get on the donkey. I got up there astride, just like riding a horse. "No, that just won't do," the director said in a snobby nasal twang. "You should ride side saddle. That is the way the real Mary would have done it." So I slid off and with some help, got back on the donkey side saddle. This was a difficult task for me, with the sheet dragging the ground and the veil slipping off my head. Immediately, the donkey became agitated. He began to toss his head up and down and stomp his feet on the ground. I could hardly hold on since there was no rope for me, and we had not even started moving. This still is the middle of my story. Notice the dialogue from the director and the bolded transition words. All of a sudden, the donkey became as mad as a hornet and took off at breakneck speed. Before I knew what was happening, I was ejected from the donkey at what felt like 99 miles per hour. I flew through the air with my arms splayed out wide, the sheet and veil blowing in the wind. I must have looked like some type of Super Friends reject. Then I heard bam, thud, and squish. For a few minutes, I was temporarily knocked out, and I even thought I saw stars. When I woke up, my preacher and youth director were standing over me saying some words I never expected my church members to say. Again, this is more the middle of the story. There's lots of figurative language in this part that hopefully helps you get a picture of what the event actually looked like if you were there. After I woke up in the mushy-gushy mud, I was helped up. I had 2 black eyes forming and a large goose egg on my forehead where I had hit the fence. But despite my injuries, the rector turned to me and asked the most ridiculous question. "Do you think you could finish the play?" she said in her most persuasive tone. Yes, I thought I could, and I did. I was indeed a real trooper. After it was all over, the preacher thought it necessary to take me home. As my mom opened the door, she, too, said some words I did not expect to hear. When she saw me, her mouth literally fell open. She could not believe what had happened. I assured her that I was okay, even though she thought I had brain damage. This is the end of my story, and it uses some examples of figurative language and dialogue to again create pictures for the reader. When I went back to school that next Monday, I had to endure quite a few jokes, but other than having to convince everyone that I had not been in a bar fight, I healed pretty easily. I hope I never have to participate in any other programs like that. I don't think my brain can endure another blunt force trauma. This is the conclusion of my story. I try to state the meaning or give some meaning at the end, and I use some exaggeration to continue to entertain the reader. I hope you enjoyed this story, which is a true one from my youth. And remember that narratives are the easiest form of essay to write because all you have to do is tell a good story. Sometimes it might be a sad story from your life. And try to enjoy the meaning. This has been The Joy of Narratives. I hope you have enjoyed the story, and I hope you find writing narratives a little easier. Let's sum up. Narratives should be entertaining or emotionally moving. They should tell a story with a beginning, middle, and ending. They should use some figurative language. Be sure you have a title for your essay. Edit your essay. And again, I hope this lessens the pain of writing narratives for all of you. This has been a World Wide Wood production.